Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Meter Cute interviews here on Meter and Mayhem. Today, I'll be chatting with Jayne Marek, whose writing appears in journals such as Terrain, Spillway, Salamander, and About Place. Winner of the Bill Holm Witness Poetry Award, she has been nominated for Best of the Net and Pushcart prizes. A college professor for many years, you can also find her scholarly work in books such as Women Editing Modernism, Little Magazines, and Literary History. She'll be reading today from her 7th poetry collection, Dusk Voiced, which is out this spring from Tebbit Bach through small press distribution. So sit back, relax, and get ready to fall in love.
Hello, my name is Jayne Marek, and I'm here to talk today about my new book, Dusk Voiced, that will be coming out from Tebbit Bach in spring of 2024. Yeah, it's kind of got a new style for me, and maybe a new style that people will be interested in, kind of longer sentences, which I will explain a little bit later. I have 2 pieces from that book, and they're about 4 minutes each. I will try to go slowly because of the long sentences. The idea is to invite you to listen and follow along in the flow of thoughts. It's also set in the Pacific Northwest, so there's quite a bit of landscape going on. Neutrality. We hope the world is neutral toward us. We'll simply place our failures, one after another, along the gravel road of the quotidian and observe how they become signals of a way we did not know we were going. There are acres of denuded, grassy field on San Juan Island, dotted with den mouths, scrabbled from pale dirt and rocks. And at any time, you may see rabbits communing about a clover, and then in distance, the humped over slink of a fox. One of many who den in the same field as the rabbits, probably swapping dens back and forth as attrition has its way, as it will, and the rabbits watch the foxes without panic and may not bother to look up if rabbit attention is being given. Little nose tip nibbles and brushing past of whiskers. Certainly the foxes watch the rabbits from the sides of their eyes, even when there is other fox business to attend to along the field overlooking Harrow Strait. And if whatever fox seems closest to a rabbit is just emerging from its den with a toothy yawn, the vulpes clearly is interested, primarily in late spring sun on dry vegetation, making warm and prickly patches on which to loll. A hunched fox and a browsing rabbit appear similar in shape, with a rounded back emphasizing powerful rear leg muscles, perfect for chasing in one case and running away in the other. And lingering sunset washes over all. Against the certainty that predators will take prey, tumble the uncertainties of how such factors will balance out. The very numbers here in the field, not overwhelming, which indicates control of the rabbit population and enough food for just this number of foxes. The sure thing is that neither these foxes and rabbits nor we who come this year will be here later. Although for a time, likely, We all will continue in the irregular, amoeba-like tentative assurance of life's flow in one direction, then another. As with the totems in this field, who cannot will to destroy all of the other in one manic sweep of abandonment. We creatures inhabit an uneven landscape of existence and extinction in a ballet of waiting for one false move. The second piece is also set in the Pacific Northwest. There are also creatures and light. This is titled Dusk Voiced. Before 11 p.m. last night, at our latitude, the western sky still held a clear azure bossed with gold, bright enough to read by on this hilltop, with the view lifting over the tops of Douglas firs. Although one could turn to look back downhill into soft, humid blankets of coming night, which allowed a few stars and twinkles of small boats over the water. Their running lights, that is, the interplay of the deep, unknowable, gradually growing over the light of day we had just moved through. A lavish violet dusk gathered along fences. And I thought about a tenderly written novel's sad, oppressive story with characters I cared about, facing daily torment under a vindictive and exploitative regime. Such experience seemed similar to existing in perpetual hunger or anxiety about being in a hostile place. One thing or another harassing the life force in entire populations. And it is hard to draw healing breaths under those conditions. I know I am lucky not to be under threat continually, not to have that type of darkness constantly overhead, at this point at least. Suddenly the evening wailed, a cry, brief and thin, curving into the treble, rising further, calling the neighborhood alert. Again, the call came again, yipping one voice to another. So I knew the coyotes had infiltrated this residential area, were waking for the night. Vocalizations are repeated for many reasons. To teach the young to express threat or anticipation, to celebrate, to create, in fact, a consistent means of expression, not to say a cliche, among a group. Perhaps creatures of the night who howl together believe their ceremony brings in the darkness that they need, the milieu of hunting into which they have evolved. So attuned is animal awareness of quotidian rhythms. An owl wakes and shivers its feathers and looks out as dusk spreads. Bats spin out delicately and smoke like from under bridges and crevices in the oldest trees. Ground creatures emerge, wood rat and weasel, and feel the air cool against wet snouts. Moonflower and evening primrose begin to unfurl, and night moths flit soft wings against a breeze that has changed direction here along the coast, flowing from cooling land toward the straight waters that turn themselves back toward the Pacific, clocking this reaching renewal under an evening sky. The hunters will oppress the hunted. What turns this night cannot be stayed. How small is one voice within it? Thank you.
Wow, Jane, thank you so much for that great reading. I love the way that your work, it's that balance. You feel kind of lulled into a sense with the words, and then something will happen that is unsettling. Um,
Yeah.
and I love the way I was trying to choose my words carefully because I some people might take that not well, but I that was amazing to me. I love that when poetry does that to me, and yours was doing that, so it was
Thank you.
great.
I
Um,
find poetry should be unsettling. I mean, the best writers get right under our skin, I think.
yes, yeah. And speaking of getting under your skin, so can you tell me about a book that has created the most mayhem in your life?
This is a wonderful question. I can't wait to hear others of your conversants talking about it. There was an anthology that came out, I think, in the early 1970s of women's writing called No More Masks! Exclamation point, edited by Florence Howe and Ellen Bass. And when it hit the bookstores at the college, it for me was a revelation. It was like the top of my head had been taken off. And I had in high school, of course, had not so much access to new writing and certainly not the range of women's voices that are in No More Masks. And I am talking about the first edition of the book. It has a white cover with a drawing on it and some red and black, orange, magenta and black printing. There was a second edition many years later that had changed out a lot of the poems. It wasn't the same. So I went and got the original again. What it has are some selections from people you might expect. HD and Marianne Moore. Um, I don't think Teasdale's in there. Edna St. Vincent Millay, sort of setting it up and then moving through some of the slightly later writers. So why mayhem? Because as a person in high school when women's literature and women's study was just not done yet, it radicalized me. And I was fortunately at a fairly liberal college where I could hang out with the radicalized people. I had radicalized teachers who brought in living women poets to talk with us. I remember Roberta Hill Whiteman just getting started. Kathleen Fraser, I remember her coming. Judy Grahn came to read at the next college over, went down to hear her. And it's just fabulous. So after that, my writing changed, my attitude changed. Um, I would give readings at the college with my friends, and we would be reading things that surprised some of our friends. And it's that feeling of newness and wonder and not so much power, but potential, let's say, potential. So mayhem was in that I was no longer willing to settle for things that had been handed to me as the limit. And I found out how many ways you could use form to raise your voice as a female or, as a male. I mean, the things that many women were writing were as explosive as things many men were writing. So then you go ahead and discover that there's a whole world. And my golly, here are some writers from other traditions whose work looks a lot like this too. So for me, it was a direction changing experience to read that. To read in that anthology, dip in and take a look. Here's Levertov, here's Adrienne Rich, here's Audre Lorde, here's Susan Griffin. Here are these folks writing terrific things that I love, and I recommend the book if people can find an old copy, and also just go back and look and see how the progression of awareness has been expressing itself in much of the 20th century. And of course, the 21st century has quite a bit more even going on that we can access, luckily, in the age of the internet.
Yeah. I found it interesting that you seemed to want to say power at first and then change to potential. Is there I'm going to ask a really broad question that's going to seem sort of silly, but take it wherever you want to go with it. But
Okay.
where do you see the differences between the two? Between saying that the book and that getting up to read and things was a sense of power versus a sense of potential?
Well, you know what? The way you phrase that is so good. It sends me back to Adrienne Rich's poem about uh, finding radium. And of course, I don't have that one marked. But if you remember the end of the poem where she's talking about how Marie Curie discovered radium, she says that her wounds came from the same source as her power. And power is, in that sense, is a beast. It's not necessarily controllable. And I sort of wince away from the idea of power, partly too, because the men were really unwilling, some of them, to let go of, being in control of the literary canon, and saying what was, important. So, you've been a teacher, I've been a teacher. It's kind of the difference between argumentation and persuasion. If you have power, there's a certain brutal structure to it, or if not, there's a certain set structure to it, or a certain coercive structure to it. Whereas potential is you can get up in the morning and play, and you can listen to all kinds of things to see what other people have done and what goes in and stays in. You learn from that. So I like the openness of potential versus what I still sort of shudder at about the use of the word power, which I think in 2024 makes me wince. Just saying.
How do you feel about empowerment and
Empowerment.
as a word, not
I
necessarily.
like that. Yeah, that's a good spin on it. So yes, thank you. Um, Getting some power. I mean, I like that process orientation to empowerment. There's a certain initiative to it and a process, which you could see that in these particular poems, which I'll talk about in a minute, if you like, uh, are very process oriented because they just sort of wander around in their sentences. And here's an idea, and here's an animal, and here's something is happening. And oh, back here is the sense of threat that um, or fulfillment or beauty that we know is always there.
Yeah, I would love for you had mentioned talking about more. Yeah, go ahead to
Okay,
talk deeper
the
about them. I'd love that.
for persons who are looking back at to in mid or later 20th century writing, one of the people whose work I had read was Archie Ammons, A.R. Ammons, a New York State poet. He was at Cornell. And his work, like Merwin's work, like many other authors' work, went through stages. And one of his books that won, let's see, it's the National Book Award, was won by his book, Garbage, which was a meditation about trash, about garbage. And I had read it long ago, and I was casting about during a month-long, which I recommend, a month-long write a poem a day thing, where I got started on some of these um, pieces. I said, well, you need to have either an approach such as I'm going to write a sonnet every day, or I'm going to have this topic, whatever. So I thought I would take his conversational, wandering couplet form because it felt like it was welcoming me in. And you can follow ideas even if you're just sort of splicing them together with like a colon. Okay, I'm going to another idea because I can't. I can do. I can do that. Yeah. So hilariously, and his actually one of his opening passages is the following, and I read from Garbage by A.R. Ammons, the second piece. Garbage has to be the poem of our times because garbage is spiritual, believable enough to get our attention, getting in the way, piling up, stinking, turning books brownish and creamy white. What else deflects us from the errors of our illusionary ways? Not a temptation to trashlessness. That is too far off. And anyway, unimaginable, unrealistic. I'm a hole puncher or a hole plugger. Stick a finger in the damn dike, hold back the issue of creativity's flood, the forthcoming, futuristic, the origins, feeding trash. So you can see while he's thinking about this giant landfill that was outside of Ithaca, New York, he's also thinking about the social attitudes that foster it. And when I went back to look at this book a couple of years ago, I was like, what have we learned? Have we learned nothing? The answer was sort of maybe we have learned nothing. So I thought, how would I update the awareness in such an approach, and how would I make it local to where I am, as he made it local to him? I mean, there's a lot about this landfill in his book. So for me, there is quite a bit about the tides and the weather and climate, the light, the creatures, and yes, there's some trash. If you live by any coast, you know that we are worse off than we were. And you're probably quite familiar with trash. So those things make their way into the book. But of course, we are all linked. It's an environmental problem. And we have, once you become aware of that and the animals who are affected by it as well as us, that was what got me started. But then with my like sense of humor or my sense of, I don't know, impending doom or what, that comes in. And so you have animals doing their thing, but that also means some animals don't get to do their thing. Um, and you just, as a nature watcher, one has to reconcile with that. Uh, yeah. So that's part of it. What part of destruction, I guess, is a larger sense. What parts of destruction can I sort of reconcile and accept, including my own destruction, should that occur? The poem in which I talk about a novel, which was written by a friend of mine, she was writing about Hungary after the Second World War. But of course, I was feeling the vibes of more contemporary political situations. And so having coyotes in the neighborhood and having worries about political things happening to defenseless peoples and creatures. That is what filtered into that particular poem.
Oh. Have you, I'm going to ask this question knowing that my answer would be no, but have you read, I know that Zizek has talked about trash. Have you read any of his work about that?
I have not. Let me write. Well, you can send me a note with
Okay.
coordinates for that. Although I will say that at a certain point, I will read some and then we'll stop reading because one of my vows is to try to have something in my writing that is uplifting. We have poets of witness who have to convey their horror pretty consistently because they're the poets of witness. And for myself, having worked through feelings of hopelessness and depression at times over the years, as many of us do, I like to have something there to hold on to that will lift me up or be beautiful, even if we're talking about something unsavory.
Mm.
So perhaps you could say a little more. How do you spell Zizek?
Oh, I think it is, let's see, I think it is Zisek. I'm not
Okay,
100% sure though.
that's okay. So
Um,
people may be, interested in doing some of that follow-up because there are some persons and groups who have much more exposure to these problems, and would like to hear about, okay, so who's doing what intellectually here, right?
yeah.
What does it say about us as the character of humanity, which I think is very much in question uh, all the time.
Um,
Oops.
yes. Do you mentioned that folks when writing poetry of witness, um, I can't remember the verb you used, but the idea that their work conveys their horrors all the time. Do you think that in poetry of witness there is a place for the everyday joys and humors as well, or just for the horrors?
Of course, there is a place for the joys and everyday goodnesses. When I am reading the poets of witness who are writing now from several war zones, which many of your listeners are probably also reading, um, often something will turn on a child's hand or something that is good, something, a balloon, the sunlight comes in, someone is merciful, someone's grandmother, hugs a person. I think those poets especially need to be able to say, I still am this human who can find this goodness, even though I must tell you what is going on because no one else can. So then the full complexity of the human experience, um, as C.S. Lewis said, being human is enough to make us raise our heads in pride, I think, and enough to make us hang our heads in shame. So I've paraphrased badly, but you'll recognize that impulse, which is to say we're as varied as we are. And I do find those moments, I wish there were more of them for the sake of the people.
Yes, I agree. And I'm trying to think of where to go from there because now my brain is pretty um is miles and miles away right now.
We could we
Poetry.
could step a little bit back. Yeah. What's nice, I had said before that reading international poets it has become so much easier for us. So we could relax and give ourselves a bit of a break and say it's always wonderful to find some international poets. And the work of translators, frankly, is absolutely fundamental. I respect it greatly. And there's such wonderful translation work being done now, and so much more is available. So for persons who are reading in that, I'd like to read more widely, but I've been working on some other projects. But the people who do the translation um, are sort of magical, in my opinion. We know Red Pine, Bill Porter, who has translated ancient Chinese poetry, and a film just came out about him, and he talks in depth about. Of course, he'd prefer not to be, literal, symbol or signal for symbol, but ethos. And because he spent decades in China and studying Chinese landscape and talking with the wisdom gurus who are up in the mountains, I adore his translations of ancient work. They just speak today. And those are extremely peaceful because he is a Zen practitioner. So maybe that's a line of hopefulness, is to say we still have these wise folks among us. And it's wonderful to remember that and to seek them out when we need a break from looking at things that are unhappy.
Yes. Yeah, that is a good point. Um, Speaking of wisdom, what what advice, if you could go back and give advice to a younger Jayne, what advice would you give?
Oh, okay. For my old person self. Let's see. I made a note here. Mm, I have another quotation, which we were teachers. We got this stuff in here. We can get it out. Um, William Faulkner, read, 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 read everything. And the whole point is, if it's Drek, then you learn what Drek looks like. And if it's great, then you look what good writing looks like, and then maybe you can do it. So even more reading. Um, we were lucky. I mean, my mom brought books home because she was reviewing them for her book club. So we got to read stuff, and she didn't care if we read stuff that was above our level. You'd rather, wouldn't you as a teacher rather have kids who are ready to pick up anything and look into it uh, than like, I don't know, just lie in bed or whatever. No, so reading everything, which also means getting used to pain and complexity and just sort of being patient about things getting better, which is a message that I'm glad some people are trying to convey repeatedly in this culture. And often they do. Folks who grow into their own awareness learn to trust that awareness. So you won't always be stuck in school, young Jayne. You'll be able to make your own choices and guide your own reading as soon as you can.
I like that. Yeah. Is there, um, other than the anthology you mentioned earlier, is there a book that you think that you would like to tell young Jayne is waiting for her? Like, just wait, you're gonna
Ooh,
love this one too.
wow. That's a wonderful question. I had not thought about it in advance. Give me a
Yeah.
moment to back and fill. Um, my own awareness of how literature worked symbolically and linguistically actually came through Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus, which is this sort of extremely depressing, um, eh, thinly disguised roman à clef about the coming of Nazism in Europe, and a composer, Adrian Leverkusen, who gets sucked in and becomes a cog of the Nazi machine, which happened in Mann's greater family. So he was like, A, I'm going to America. B, I have to write about this. So as I finished reading that book, because he used the overlay of the story of Goethe's Faust about making your deal with the devil, um, and by the time I finished reading that book, uh, it came to me what literature was. Before that, it had been stories. After that, it was meaning. And that's probably where I got my sort of gloomy outlook about, well, we have to have the gloom because frankly, it has power. Uh, but yeah, so Dr. Faustus is not an easy read, but for me it was good. As for happy, wonderful books, well, there was William Stafford who'd been writing all along, and I forget when I discovered him. But of course, he has many things that are droll and delightful and tasty and light, as well as very insightful about us negotiating our way through the world.
Mm. Yes. A couple years ago, they came out with a anthology, um, for like the maybe it was I think they may have, it's a pleasure to read together or something like that. About William Stafford, where people did poems sort of as homages or in the style of. And
Yeah,
it was a
yeah,
wonderful
yeah.
collection.
Oh, yes, indeed. And his son is writing every day too. So, it goes on. Um, yes. So Stafford, let's see who else. Well, some of the newer writers, I made a bunch of, well, I have, of course, a million favorites. Uh, the metrical people I learned from were uh, oops. Oh, Sarah Teasdale back in the day, Marianne Moore. And she's a tough nut to crack, I'll tell you what, but she's so funny when you get used to her because she's just so, she makes an appearance in my book because you just can't not have Marianne, Marianne Moore is in my head. Um,
Where's
William
your
Stafford.
tricorn hat?
Richard Wilbur is the name I was looking for because, he was so influential. And surely we've all taught some of his work. We might have taught his translation of Tartuffe, which is absolutely a classic. So his extreme skill with language, French and English, um, was very instructive to me. Plus, he also had a sense of humor. I first really noticed him when I was taking the AP English exam in high school, and the poem to analyze was "Love Calls Us to the Things of This World."
Mhm.
And I was like, how can you write that? And then you read more. As for non-metrical people, of course, waiting in the wings was HD, Denise Levertov, back in the day, Sylvia Plath, who is very well versed in metrical writing, but did not always write in metrical regularity. Um, Louise Gluck, more recently. So we all have our current favorites, I'm sure. Um, those are just names that some people will be like, yeah, delightful.
Yeah. And to remind folks, like, oh yeah, I should go back and read more of them again.
Tartuffe, especially because you'll be laughing on the train or in the bus or wherever.
We read Tartuffe in college, so I haven't read it for probably about 25 years now. I will revisit it after this. Um,
Oh my goodness.
Another question that I have for you that I'm kind of interested in is what advice do you think a younger version of Jane would have for
Oh,
you now?
yeah, yeah. I would say, you know what? There are some things that happen when you're young that turn out to be valuable your whole life. And you might be lucky enough to have a sense at the time that you really want to remember this person or save this memento as a reminder of this learning experience. So I would say to the young person, yes, these are valuable, but the young person can say, I don't know why this is valuable, but I'm hanging on to it. And by golly, decades later, that memory still feeds me. So honor how we are becoming, honor even the mistakes, because guess what? There are quite a few. Oh, also forgive me my mistakes that got you in trouble sometimes. At this point, I can say, yes, indeed, young Jay, you have learned to forgive yourself some of these things.
And that is not an easy thing to learn. I would say I'm definitely still that is something I struggle with. So I like that you and young Jane can have that conversation together.
There are still some things I need to say to young Jane, but she can say to me, back off, you old fart.
Oh.
Which I said that a lot when I was a kid in my head. Oh my goodness.
Oh.
Ah,
Well, it
wow.
has been absolutely delightful getting to talk with you today, Jane. Thank you for coming to chat with me.
Oh, Jen, I'm delighted to talk with you. I look forward to listening to more of your interviews with folks, and I hope that we can run into each other in real life at some point. Thanks to everyone who's dropped by to listen to the work and our thoughts.
Wow, what a fun interview that was. I use the word fun in what way am I using fun? Because there were definitely some parts that were really, really deep, right? Like there was stuff and my brain gets all fun isn't quite the right word, is it? But that's how I always start these, so that's what I went for. Pleasurable? Enjoyable? I don't know. What word would you use for things like that? Let me know down in the comments below. Give me a little engagement, friends. Uh, yeah, I feel like I've got a lot to think about from some of the things Jayne said, and a lot of stuff that I want to read. Hope you do too. Thanks for stopping by.